And we're live on the Entrepreneur's Handbook. Today we have with us Sabrina Castiglione, who's the COO of Pento and the former CFO of Tessian. Pento is all about making payroll painless. Sabrina has chosen to talk today about how you can use automation as a product differentiator. Sabrina, could you let us know why you picked that topic and why it's so important?
Yeah, so a bit of background about me and what I do. A lot of the teams that I tend to run in startups are what are called kind of G&A or general and administrative teams. So this is things like legal, HR, finance. I also look after some other teams from time to time, but often that tends to be kind of like my area of expertise. And the reality is that now more than ever, no one has enough time. Everyone's being asked to do with less. Even with my finance hat on, if I'm thinking about where to allocate $1 in the business, I probably want to put that $1 into research and development or go to market rather than to general and administrative. But it is the nature of businesses, especially as they grow, to turn G&A functions into admin monkeys. And there are a lot of really great value add things that, people, finance and legal teams can do for their business. But it is a constant battle against the business as usual, the BAU, the handle turning, the processing of the endless pieces of administration. And that's kind of why I'm so passionate about automation. I have a real belief that if it is something that is like purely deterministic, like get a machine to do it, to free up people, even if they are in G&A functions, to do the really value add work.
Yeah. And how did this come about, right? So before you were the CFO at Tessian, and I guess you had a lot of problems with automation and all these different tasks there. Like, what made you really passionate about this in the first place?
Yeah, so I joined Tessian in the really early days back. I actually joined as person number 7, so 4th employee after the founders. And by the time I left, it was kind of reaching up into around the kind of 300 people range. And that was kind of over the space of about 6 years. So a lot of, development and different stages of the company. And the thing is that with like a lot of these processes is, the old boiled frog analogy that like if you drop a frog into boiling water, it will jump straight out. But if you put it in cold water and boil it slowly, like it will stay there and boil to death. I don't know if that's true or not, but I always think about it in terms of how admin creeps up on a business, because it's one small thing that happens at one point in time that you're like, okay, here's something that I would ideally like to not happen again or that needs to happen. And, you go from having like a 3-line IT onboarding checklist to something that's 3 pages long. You go from spending, 5 minutes on payroll to, across the business people are spending a week. And it's really, because it happens so slowly and so gradually, it's really hard to notice that it's kind of creeping up on you. But eventually at one point, you just kind of turn around and you go, what am I doing with my time? Like, how have I ended up spending time on this? And I speak to a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs who are growing their businesses, and they can sense that something's changed, and it's really hard for them to pinpoint why they feel like they're getting less done, like as things are kind of moving on. And a lot of it is just that this kind of this admin and this busy work has grown up around it. And it's something that you have to be very kind of conscious about fighting and finding ways around. So the way I actually came across Pento in the first place is because we hired a new financial controller at Tessian who, came in with like a fresh set of eyes and looked at our payroll process and said, Sabrina, this is horrible. We're going to not do this. We're going to put in a new tool. It's something he'd used at his last company called Pento. And that's how I came across Pento. And like, I'm a big believer that, especially in like the ages that we've had of the crypto boom, and now there's the AI boom, and there are these like really kind of sexy businesses out there doing like really exciting stuff. But I'm actually really passionate about like the company solving incredibly boring problems, because it's they're problems that everyone has, and in some ways it's more important to get rid of the boring problems than it is to to add extra juice to the really exciting ones. So yeah, I'm really passionate about using the opportunity here to help people make better use of their time, because something like payroll isn't something that should be part of people's jobs, especially like if you're like a great finance or people person. I don't think payroll is how you want to be spending your time. And so that's kind of why I'm really excited about what we're building here. And our vision is very much, one-click payroll, whereby it is perfectly end-to-end automated, very minimal human involvement, basically so that people can do better things with their time.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, I don't think many people enjoy doing payroll necessarily, especially entrepreneurs. And it seems like quite an obvious problem. Why do you think that it took so long for Pento to come along and try to solve that problem? Why was there a status quo of people doing some of these administrative tasks when it seemed like a clear problem there?
I think I think there are a couple of things. One is just how normalized it is, because it is such like a universal problem. It would be like saying, like, should we use emails, right? It's just like everyone's just so used to it. It takes a while to really sort of go and have a look and say, hang on, is this something that we should be doing? So it's so normalized, it's so established. But also it's a messy problem. Payroll is basically tax, and that is not a nice, easy company to build that's going to work perfectly for every different geography. It's obviously incredibly geographically localized. You're at the whim of like whatever a particular government or tax authority decides to do. They decide to change how taxes work for XYZ. Well, surprise, it's your problem now. Like it's a messy, ugly problem, which is why it's not one that a lot of people are doing and kind of going into. But what we find is that there are just a lot of really technologically underserved people out there. And there are some global providers that try and do a very thin layer of like basic payroll across lots of geographies, and they can probably handle a tech business that has monthly salaried employees who get the same amount every month, and maybe they get like an expense here or a bonus there. But particularly in industries where there are things like 0-hour workers and lots of other kind of complexities around there, it's extremely technologically underserved because it's such a messy problem, which is why not many people are willing to go the graft of spending 5 to 10 years building something that just works great for a particular geography.
Yeah, and looking at that as well. So obviously, once that product was then built, how was it to try to convince people to bring the product on board, right? Because if people are used to the status quo and it's taking a risk on a company that's potentially new, a technology that's new, how easy was it to position the framing of the automation as this is the future, this is what's going to make a huge difference for you? Because it's for us to talk about it, but with the clients, how is that conversation?
Yeah, so it's there are kind of different sort of different angles to it, and you can kind of think of people as like problem aware or problem unaware, and then solution aware or solution unaware. And there are some people who are just, because it is so normalized and they've been doing it this way for 20 odd years, so they are genuinely problem unaware, that like they have a lot of pain, but they don't realize how much pain they have. But generally, if you go deep into payroll and HR circles, there are a lot of people who are more problem aware, but there is just like this lack of belief that there is a solution there. And obviously, payroll is like a really sensitive topic. Like you get the wrong paycheck, you're not chill about it, right? Like you don't get paid. Like no one's like, oh, it's fine, I'll just wait an extra month for my paycheck. So it does. it does push a lot of responsibility onto like those of us tackling these problems to, we cannot move fast and break things. We definitely want to move fast, but we cannot break things. People not getting paid is unacceptable. And this is partly why there aren't many companies building this particular kind of automation, because it's really hard. But yeah, so, there is this piece around trying to establish, like, is the market that we're speaking to problem aware or problem unaware, and like solving that first, either by surfacing, here are the pains in the process, and like, a lot of marketing and content around really helping people like discover like the time that they're spending, and the time that, like, payroll is a really team sport in a lot of like larger companies, the time that other people that they don't see are also spending on payroll. And then once they're problem aware, like trying to hone in on like a really particular part of the solution that, like, wherever like there is the biggest solution for them, and going deep on that, whilst providing all of like the comfort blankets on kind of like security and uptime and reliability to help get them over the line. But I think when you go deep, payroll is something that not many people think about, but also very few people are happy about when they actually like go and think about how much time they're spending. So, it is a situation where we have to kind of really go and talk to people, especially when they are outside of tech, and they are thinking about things through the lens of transformation and digital transformation, and they are going through some of the early stages of a technological journey, and learning what technology can do for them. A sort of double-edged sword of the current market, that a lot of people are being kind of thrown headfirst into starting to have to understand digital capabilities, because resource, time, headcount, budget has been taken away from them, and they need to find ways to do more, which is obviously very unfortunate, because in the sense that, there are a lot of people who, there are no longer employment opportunities there. But it does mean that helping people get the most out of the time that they have is really important.
And like you said there as well earlier about how payroll's a boring problem, but that boring problem can really help so many people. But how do you automation? Even when you say automation, it can still sound like very interesting, right? It's like, what are you automating? How do you decide where to focus innovation on that side of the product, right? What's the best things to automate? Because it'd be quite easy. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it's a great question, because especially with a rabbit hole, whenever there is anything to do with tax, and tax, whatever jurisdiction you go into, is generally like very, very messy to unwind. If you go and try and like understand some of the UK payroll rules, like, you can see that it's kind of really kind of shaky houses of cards built on the most like janky foundations. It can be really, really hard to unpick, and there is a temptation to just go deeper and deeper and deeper into each and every edge case, because like it's this kind of never ending like fractal universe where like you find some really bizarre edge cases of intersections of three incredibly unlikely things that happen at the same point, and suddenly it all becomes really unclear. But I think you always have to think through the lens of pain. Like, where is the pain, and the biggest pain in these companies? And for us, like the really clear metric for us is just time. And we're a really unusual business in the sense that, if you're building a Twitter or a marketplace or something, you want people spending as much time in and on your product as possible. We want people spending as little time on our product as possible. So one of the things that we do is we have like analytics set up in the background to say, where in the product are people spending their time? What are the things that people are still going and changing manually or working around manually? And wherever those largest buckets of time are that are being spent in the product, is usually a really good indicator of where we need to kind of go and do more work and invest more in automation. So I think it's one of the unusual things about businesses where automation is a differentiator, that actually that old adage of you wanting to spend people to spend a lot of time in your product. It's completely reversed. You want people to spend as little time as possible in your product.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you want to find some of the best lessons from season 1 of this podcast, then you can download our free ebook using the link in the show notes. You'll also get updates multiple times a week from our editors here at Entrepreneur's Handbook, all aimed at helping you become a better entrepreneur and helping you to grow and scale your business. Let's get back to the show. I really like that about going into the back end to see where people are spending the most time. Because, like I said, for, say, a Facebook or a Twitter, that's the thing you double down on, right? Okay, we want to keep people engaged. Whereas almost in a way, you want people to be spending as little time as possible, like you said. And how do you, I guess another thing as well, when you have this automation, these new products come out, and people already have already using it, how do you ensure they're making the best use of the product? Because they might buy the product and then they're not making full use of automation and then decide, oh, it's not actually helping us that much. How do you get that messaging across effectively?
Yeah, it's there's no one silver bullet for this. It's really important to have a very clean and intuitive UI. We are probably over invested on UI and UX early on relative to other businesses, especially given that we're not a consumer app. Our we put a lot of emphasis on design, and that's really important in in helping make things simple. But it's also just a lot of things around translating things to how people think. There is, even in the world of payroll, there is payroll jargon, gross and net, where actually you want to talk about before or after tax, and sort of just finding ways to communicate things that a layperson who, because our vision is that we don't want people to have to become payroll experts. So what would a layperson understand something to be? So there are kind of principles like that. And there are just kind of other principles in kind of how you kind of go around educating your base. And it's a team sport, partly it's a lot on kind of the product and engineering side. And our engineers, whether or not you consider this a good thing or a bad thing, they end up becoming UK payroll experts. I'm sure it's not what they dreamed of as young children, but they they end up understanding the problem space incredibly well. And even from that perspective of system design and data, they're thinking about how these elements need to interact. But then also, our CS and support team, our customer success and support team, there's not a one size fits all. They will do one to many webinars. They will also do one-on-one calls. Our support team are incredibly responsive. We do help desk articles. We use tool tips a lot. I think it's just a case of, there isn't one single way that your hypothetical user is going to absorb this information. And it's just trying to find as many ways as possible to help them on their journey. And the nice thing is that once people are in the habit of running their payroll, there do tend to be a lot of commonalities for a given company and how a payroll run varies from one run to the next. So usually, we invest a lot up front in the onboarding process, and in the first couple of months in helping people, get up to a good velocity of running payroll. And then people are usually able to find their own incremental benefits kind of after that. But it's another interesting angle in that, I think especially in SaaS businesses, people are really scared of services. And, it's never been our intention to build a services company. And you have to kind of be mindful around should this be a service or not? But sometimes sometimes I think the reluctance of SaaS businesses to do any kind of services is a disservice, especially when it's like a complicated domain. Sometimes it's really worthwhile investing in that upfront and weaning people off it down the line, if that's what helps people be, as productive and effective in your product as possible.
And let's say somebody listening right now who likes the idea of going into a boring industry and using automation as a point of differentiator there. What have you learned in the process so far and seen from the journey of Pento that they should really be aware of before they get involved in this? Because obviously there'll be opportunities out there, but what should they be aware of? What's maybe the challenges they might face?
Yeah, I mean, Pento is VC backed, but there are strong arguments that actually these aren't necessarily the most obvious businesses for VC backing, in the sense that if these problems are genuinely there because it is a complex, fragmented, messy domain, it is hard to build a business that grows at the time frame. It's taken years and years to get Pento to this point where now we have a really great product, but we're however many years through a VC's typical 10-year cycle. So I think even things about I think if you're going into these kind of problems, this is probably a 15-year journey rather than a 7 to 10-year journey. It is probably a slow burn business to get it up to the level of momentum, and then it can kind of grow very fast. But I think that they are generally quite time intensive in the first instance, just because the nature of the problem, if you're an engineer, it's very hard to turn payroll into a DAG, a directed acyclic graph, because it's so recursive, a lot of what you have to do. I would also say to cultivate as cross-functional a team as you can in the early days of cultivating this product. So at the minute, I look after the engineering team. We have a payroll expert who is heavily involved on product. As I said, our engineers are incredibly knowledgeable about the payroll domain. We definitely don't have a waterfall kind of setup where it goes through product and then design and then gets handed to engineers. Engineers will sometimes, especially principal and system design engineers, will be people that we get on right at the start of even thinking about tackling a new payroll problem to try and figure out the data angles. And having people who can just kind of span a lot of different areas of the business is kind of really important for that, because the problem is so complex. So I think you would have to be willing to be in it for the long run. They are hard problems to solve and hard businesses to build. Really rewarding if you do, because those are the exact reasons not a lot of people go after these problems. And build as cross-functional and early team as you can. In fact, I would say avoid specialization or over-specialization for as long as possible, because that cross-functional feedback is really important. Even to this day, I still run Pento's payroll myself. And it's really helpful, actually, as someone who is also looking after the engineering and side of the business and involved in product discussions, to be the person who can say, here is where it doesn't necessarily meet all my needs from a finance perspective. And here's where we could get better data, or here's where I'm spending time. And I think it goes against some of the 2020, 2021 mindset of build a really big team really fast and specialize early and bringing people who have, been there and done it before. It's an interesting kind of company to build, but I think because it's hard, it's why I enjoy it so much.
It's really interesting as well that you said that you use Pento yourself as a customer, and it is quite interesting to see that interplay, right? Because obviously you can see the problems yourself, and it's that kind of meta thing, right? Of if you're getting frustrated using the product, then you know where to fix it as well. And is that something where, when you've worked at different companies as well, that you've seen that kind of similar mentality? Or when you were at Tessian, what was the kind of differences in mindset you've had to make working at a company like Pento based on the field you're in?
Yeah, well, I mean, funnily enough, for a long time at Tessian, which was a security company, security as a function was kind of split between myself on kind of the G&A side of things and our head of engineering on the tech side of things. So there was this perspective of, as a security company needing to be really, really secure and to think about it. But I think in these kinds of businesses, and Tessian had like a similar perspective, and it really started out in preventing misaddressed emails, like sending an email to the wrong person. Again, like not a particularly like sexy problem, but one that like lots and lots of people have. If you can, it's also helpful in the case of, speaking to customers and prospects. Like if you really deeply understand their problem as well, especially as an early stage business, it helps you kind of establish those early beachheads if you can demonstrate like a really good understanding of the challenge. And in the earliest days of Tessian, our first set of beachhead customers were typically law firms, like law firms and financial industry. We had a lot of people who really had these problems and these needs, and that would typically be who we sold to. And actually, like our earliest customer success people and our earliest sales team members, we hired them out of law and banking. And, they had no CS or sales, like formal sales experience at that point in time. But they were excellent because they just deeply, deeply understood the customer. So yeah, I think you have to be willing to kind of break some of those, some of those rules of kind of hyperscale of like, you need to have people who've been there, done it before. You want people to come into things with a first principles attitude, willing to kind of figure things out, but also to just have a deep respect and empathy for the customer. And I think especially in the early stages of a business before you've found product market fit, it's probably the most valuable thing you can do.
And so we're going to have to wrap up it in a second, but can you tell the audience, like, what's the future hold for you and Pento?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're really excited about where we can take things. When I think about running a company from a go-to-market perspective, whenever you're trying to do a deal, you have to think about the 3 whys. Why buy anything? Why buy this product? Why buy now? Why buy anything is really easy for us. If they have employees, they're running payroll, right? Like they might not be using us to do it right now, but they definitely have something. So then, we're really focusing on those other 2 angles of, what's going to make Pento special and unique, and also kind of why buy now. Whenever changing an admin system, there is like an upfront like time cost that had to be paid. So those are kind of the 2 real areas that we're focusing on: differentiation and ease of like switchover and onboarding to kind of drive the business forward. We have hundreds and hundreds of customers. We run payroll for thousands of UK employees. And we're just really kind of focused on bringing our solution to help as many people as possible spend as little time as possible on payroll.
Perfect. So thanks so much for coming on today. If the listeners want to find out more about you and find out more about Pento, where should they go to?
So to find out more about Pento, they can go to www.pento.io. And to find out more about me, well, you might want to I won't spell out my surname because it's quite long, but if you look it up and just plug it into LinkedIn, feel free to reach out anytime. Always happy to jump on a coffee or a call or help someone sound something out.
Finally, before you go, like, who are 3 people you're going to shout out? So I'll say again in the format. So, and finally, before you go, could you name 3 entrepreneurs that you'd love to shout out that you think they're doing great work?
Yeah. So 2 of them are former Tessians. One is Ben Freeman, who is building the next generation of procurement tech at Omnia. Again, solving like an ugly, horrible, boring problem in like a really great way. The second is Tessian's former head of engineering, Andy Smith, who is building a new kind of layer of security over at Tracebit. And third is just a good friend, Pete Hamilton, who is the CTO over at Incident.io, who has been a great help to me in getting our engineering team cadences and setups running, and they're doing great work too.